Hi everyone! In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to assemble my woodland forest fairy. This is a fairy I designed before I started making video tutorials, so on my blog you will also see step-by-step photo tutorials for this fairy. So feel free to follow whichever tutorial method you prefer. If you're working on a woodland theme, I also have another woodland fairy. This is my sitting tabletop woodland fairy, great for decorating desks or party tables. I'll include a link in the description below for this fairy. Now let me show you what you'll see in your woodland fairy downloaded file. Here are the parts of this fairy. You'll see one fairy body, but to make a whole fairy you'll need to cut out two of these, so keep that in mind. And you'll see one hanging notch, and you'll also have 3 bud branches and 4 leaf branches. So cut everything out exactly as you see them here, except for the fairy's body. You'll need to cut 2 of those. For this project there is one fold line at the fairy's wing right here. So for my Cricut users, you'll see there are 2 folders, one with the title Yes Scoring Tool and the other with the title No Scoring Tool in the names. And this is for those of you using Design Space for Cricut. If you're new to Cricut, you can watch my video on fold lines, which I'll link below, and this will explain all about fold lines in Design Space. And in case it's not already obvious, if you do not have a scoring tool, make sure you load in the fairy file from the No Scoring Tool folder. For anyone on other machines like the Silhouette, I'm not sure how my fold lines load in, so feel free to send me a message or leave a comment. I'm always happy to learn about other software and how I can improve my designs for your use. Okay, now here are my fairies cut and ready. Notice the fold lines here. I actually did these by hand with a bone folder, but you can also do this with a knitting needle or the smooth side of a butter knife. So if fold lines are giving you grief in your software for whatever reason, go ahead and delete them and just make these fold lines by hand. It takes seconds to do. So to make one fairy, you'll need 2 fairy bodies, as I said, and 1 hanging notch. And for her wings, you'll need 4 leaf branches and 3 bud branches. And here are the materials you'll need. If you're not familiar with double-sided tape, the tape I use looks like this, and it has a white liner over it so that one side of the tape is exposed with the sticky tape and the other side is protected with liner. For creating this fairy, the liner does come in handy, and I will show you why when we assemble our fairy. I'll also include a link below for this tape if you don't already have it. I'm also using plain white glue, which I'll dispense into a small bowl just for easy access. The X-Acto knife is optional. I just use it to remove the liner from my tape. You can easily just use your fingernail or even a tweezer. Now let's assemble our fairy. To begin, if you don't have a scoring tool, you will probably have these dashed cut lines on your fairies, and these lines tend to be hard to see sometimes, so I'm going to fold both my fairies at the wing to make these lines more apparent. Then put one fairy aside, and for the remaining fairy, we are going to cut some double-sided tape about the same length as the fold line. If you haven't resized your fairy, this length should measure to be about 1.5 inches, and you don't have to be exact here. The roll of tape I'm using is about 3/4 of an inch wide, which is too wide for what we want, so I'm going to cut it in half lengthwise. Which actually works out because we will need a second piece of tape in a bit, so I'm going to set the other piece of tape aside. And now attach your tape right along your fold line here without overlapping it. Next, remove the liner on your tape. Now take your ruler and place it so that you have a mark about 1/2 inch from the right side of the wing. And just make sure your ruler is not covering the sticky tape at all. This 1/2 inch mark is where we'll be placing our hanging notch, but we're not placing it quite yet, so we just want to keep that spot open. Then take one leaf branch, and here I just trim a little bit off the end of my branch. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, especially if your tape is quite wide. And now attach it to the tape like this with the curve leaning to the right. And you want to avoid placing it at that 1/2 inch mark because remember we want to keep that spot open. Now take a second leaf branch and with the curve in the opposite direction of the first branch, place this one near the head of the fairy on the left side of your tape. Make sure that no leaves are overlapping the fairy's head. Then take a bud branch and place it somewhere near the center. Again, avoid this 1/2 inch spot. Now take a second bud branch and place it next to the leaf branch on your left. And now, finally, we can place our hanging notch in that open space. The reason I do things in order like this is because this first set of buds and leaves are going to open to one side of the notch, and the next set we put on are going to open to the other side of the notch. But doing it this way just keeps things more organized. Now take your notch and place it at that 1/2 inch spot on your ruler. I place it so that the mark sits at the center of my notch, and also make sure the round part of your notch sits above your tape. We need to be able to put our string through the hole. Next, place a second piece of tape, same size as the first piece, and put it over everything, but again, make sure it's not overlapping the fold line. And one important detail here, when you remove the lining on this piece of tape, keep that lining because we will be needing it soon, so just set it aside somewhere close. Now take your third bud branch and place it in the center of the first two. And then lastly, place your remaining 2 leaf branches next to your first 2 branches and facing in the same direction as the first 2. And as I said, this second set of buds and leaves will open to the opposite side of the first set that we attached. And remember that liner we kept? We're going to bring that guy back and cover up your tape area with it. Next, bring your second fairy cutout back and align it on top of this first fairy. You want to get a near perfect alignment here, matching all her fingers and toes. Once you have a good alignment, hold down both fairies securely and lift up the top fairy. And lift up that top fairy to reveal that tape liner underneath. And with your X-Acto knife, carefully reach in to remove that lining without letting your fairies become misaligned. Then press your top fairy down and press on that tape area. And now our fairies are attached, and all we need to do is glue the rest of her together. I like to start at her skirt, and it's easier if you work in small sections here because it helps to make sure all the parts are aligned. And all you're doing is lifting up the top fairy, applying glue to a small section, and then pressing the 2 fairies together at that spot. If you're using regular white glue like I am, you may find that some parts will start to separate, so just keep going back to check on your glued parts. And continue this until all the fairy parts are glued together. Be careful when you're opening up the top fairy that you don't over bend it because you don't want to create a fold line. And here I am going back to press together any parts that have opened up. And that's it, your fairy assembly is finished. Now we need to tie some string to our notch, so here I'm going to open up her wings layer by layer. And there's the notch. Now take your string, I'm using clear monofilament or fishing line, and loop it through the hole. Then tie your first knot loosely and then come in with your second knot a little tighter. And then with your third knot, you can go even tighter. I do this to avoid cutting into the paper with my knots. You can also create a loop with your string rather than tying the knots right up against the paper. Just be aware that tying your knots too tight and too quickly can rip into the paper. And that's it. Now you can fluff up those leaves and buds so they're not laying too flat against her wings. And your fairy is ready for hanging. Thanks for following along, guys. I hope you enjoy this one.